again to Garden Wise Adventures, and today is another in my series of design videos. Today we're going to talk about use and access. Now when you talk about use, it seems pretty straightforward. How do you want to use your property? Do you want to use it for entertaining? Do you want to use it to grow food? Do you want to use it for children to play? Do you have pets? What do you want to use your property for? Now, when you think about what you want to use your property for, sometimes it's a little more in-depth than you would think. So, for example, let's say you want to entertain. Where is the natural flow and place to gather? You need to look at that. And around your yard, kind of imagine yourself doing these activities. Where would you naturally go? If you're going to have an outdoor kitchen area, maybe it's wise to think about where your actual kitchen is and see where the access point to that is and make it a short distance from there. If you're going to be gardening, do you want it close to your kitchen or do you want it further away? If you have animals, do you want to smell the chickens, hear them if you have chickens? Do you want your neighbors to smell them or hear them? You need to think about situating things like that. So let's go around my yard and let's think about use and access. Now, as I look at my yard and think about my life and what it's been and then what it can be, we've used this backyard mainly for my pets and for my children when they were young. But I have not done a lot of entertaining, but my children are grown and out now. And entertaining may end up becoming something that I want to do. It's a small area. I'm not the outdoor kitchen kind of person. So what would I like? What would I need? Possibly a fire pit and a seating area somewhere. I would like more garden area. I would like kind of a food forest area. Where is the best place for that? So I need to look at my property. Number one, see what kind of area I have, where the access points are, where the flow goes, and just kind of think about what I would like to use it for. This area right here I've thought about using as kind of a food forest garden area, but as you notice, we're in quite a bit of shade and this is noon. But we're also in mid-November and the sun is lower in the sky. In the summertime, there is a lot more sun on this side, on this area, so this might be a good area for a food forest and more food. Now we need to think about access. Why do we need to think about access? And what do we need to think about when we think about access? Well, when I built this property, it didn't have a fence around it. And the guy who built the fence talked me into putting a large, I think it's probably 8-foot wide access gate so that we could drive a truck through it if needed. And I've done that a couple of times early on when I was bringing compost and mulch in. But now I've made that gate pretty useless because there is no access for a large vehicle to go into my backyard from the front yard without knocking down several plants. Now, do I need access for a large truck into the backyard right now? Probably not. So when I redo the landscape in the front, I need to think about that. Is that something I'm going to want in the future? Do I want to be able to use that? So as you're building your landscape, don't end up cutting off access points that you might want to use later. As I look at my property, I start thinking about access points from the street onto my property. Right now, I have several different grass pathways, and I use them quite a bit. I use this pathway quite a bit. So if I were to block this off, that's going to block off a useful pathway. It doesn't need to be grass, but it can be something else. When people park on the street, they need access to the stairs. Which is pretty blocked off by cars in the driveway. So the driveway is not a great access point unless you're parking in the driveway. So leaving an access point here where people can quickly and easily get to the stairs is a good idea. I need to think about this tree. It's going to get bigger as it ages, and I may need to start doing some strategic pruning. So think of the full size of plants that are around your access ways and think about how often you're going to want to be pruning them. Now, I would love to have a seating area in my front yard. And I've kind of slated this area over here as a seating area. So access to the seating area. Do I want to walk through mulch? Do I want a pathway? I've got to think about that. Another thing to think about with access is who and what areas do you want to block off? This area used to be a pathway for all the kids in the neighborhood. They would cut across my property using this pathway. You can't see it now because the plants have all grown in, and that's effectively cut that off so the kids now go around. They do not go through my property. But before the plants grew in, I gave up. I didn't want to, treat the kids poorly, and I didn't mind them cutting across my property. I just didn't want them trampling the plants. So I actually put stepping stones in this area. They are now all covered by woolly thyme, so you can't really see them very well, but we had stepping stones, and the kids actually used the stepping stones rather than trampling my plants. But now that's a moot point. Do I want the kids coming back through my property? I need to think about that, and if I do, want to give them an access point or want an access point for myself, I may need to change up the plants in this area. Something else you need to think about when you're thinking about the use of your property is your utility areas. Do you have, do you do a lot of potting? Do you work with potting soil? Do you need a potting shed? I don't generally, so I don't pot things up, so I don't need those kind of things, but you might want those. Would you want that area to be seen by a lot of people, or would you want that blocked off? You need to think about that. Compost is another one. If you decide you want to compost, where do you want that compost? If you have it near your kitchen, it's easier to put your kitchen scraps in the compost. I actually don't compost very many of my kitchen scraps because the compost is so far away. And I just don't end up doing it. I don't want to store. I've tried different ways of storing them in the house for a day or two, and then they end up stinking, and so I've just quit. But I do put all my garden waste in the compost bin. And up here at the top of the garden has turned out to be a wonderful area for it. It's close to my garden beds so that I can put the compost in the garden beds. And it's in an area where it's a straight shot just to bring a wheelbarrow up of garden debris and leaves. So I do like where I have my compost. You need to think about your own composting needs. Do you want it blocked off? Don't put it far away from where it's going to be used, otherwise you won't use it. Another thing to think about is wildlife. Insects, predatory insects, birds. Do you want areas for animals? That is part of the reason I have my hill the way I do. There are plants up there that forms berries. There's cover for them. And I'll put a couple of pictures of some of the birds that come here. I have a quail that live here and have come here regularly. I get snakes. A lot of you probably don't like that idea, but I love having the snakes because they're rodent control. I get orioles in the spring that come here every single year. They've chosen this area to nest. And I've also had pheasants. I'll show you some pictures of the pheasants that come and live on my property. One year I had male come and live here, but I had dogs, and the females really didn't like the area he chose because of the dogs. The next year I had a female come live here, but I have not seen them yet this year. So, and maybe it's actually because I work all day and haven't had a chance to look out and see if they're here. But, look at that. Look at what kind of animals and birds you'd like to attract. And leave a little portion of your property just a little bit wild so that it welcomes the animals into it. Another way to welcome birds is make sure you have different levels in your garden. We've got the tall trees, that's good areas for the birds to nest. We've got a mid-story where that form berries. The birds like to live there and go visit there and get food. And then we have the lower understory that houses a lot of other birds. That's where the pheasants loved so much. They would live all winter long under the trees and shrubs here. So I challenge you to go out and look at your property. Think about what you would like to use it for. Look at the flow of traffic on your property. See where each section would be the best. And then also look at your access points. Do you have good access points? And be sure not to block those good access points off. Do you have points that you need to be an access point that aren't right now? Can you create new access points? So go out and look at your property. If you like these videos, look for the rest of my design series to go every